There's one common mistake that I see people do when it comes to their central nervous system that they think is actually helping, but it can completely push them down the wrong direction. First off, if you're new to the channel, my name is Dr. Cameron Daniels. I'm an upper cervical chiropractor with a focus specifically in neurology, where I focus on chronic conditions as it relates to people's nervous system's health to help get them and point them on a path of restoration when it comes to their healing, the way that the body's designed to. So what are these types of nervous systems that I see? I see two types of nervous systems that people can really identify on a day-to-day basis. We have what's called a hyperactive state, a hypoactive state, and I guess you can add the third, which is the gold standard, which would be the regulated state. Now, what can happen is in forms of nervous system dysregulation, we often see them show up in a hyperactive state, which is an overactive or wired state. This is essentially the gas pedal being pushed to the floor and the RPMs are speeding through the roof, but the car's not going anywhere. And then we have the hypoactive state. This is a low functioning state of your central nervous system where the brake is on, and again, the car is not moving. And what we see here is a type of flat feeling or tired feeling where people really have a lack of motivation, although it's much, much deeper than this. And the reality is we can actually have two states going on at the same time, but the body always wants to kick one into overdrive over the other. So for example, we might have a hypoactive dominant state, meaning that it's sitting at about 70% capacity, and we might have a hyperactive state at a 65. This would still mean that the hypoactive state is more dominant than the hyperactive state. So we'd want to make sure that we focus on the hypoactive state before we start focusing on the hyperactivity. So what does each state feel like? For a hyperactive state, we have racing thoughts, increased heart rate. We have migraines typically associated with this, CRPS, a lot of these conditions where there's so much activity going inside of the central nervous system that they can't seem to settle down. Let's say waking up at 3 a.m. wired, but also tired, can't go to bed because the racing thoughts are so bad, and a natural sense of anxiety that just doesn't seem to go away. This is what we would call a hyperactive state. Now, what about the hypoactive state? We can also call this the depressive state. This is where we see a sense of flatness, very tired, chronic fatigue syndrome, depression, a sense of just heaviness along their central nervous system that they can typically feel on a day-to-day basis. And the unfortunate reality is that when multiple types of these patients walk into doctor's offices, they often label them as crazy or that it's all in their head. And it's not all in their head. It's coming from their central nervous system. We're just not checking it properly. So for example, if you are in a hyperactive dominant state, we would also have this term called dysautonomia, which is where the body's so wired and so tired that there's an increased amount of sensory input that the body just can't seem to shut down. So what our job is in a hyperactive state is to be able to bring the nervous system down back to baseline. And then on the contrary, in a hypoactive state or a low functioning state, we want to help increase the function of the central nervous system. So for example, you can think of it this way. The ultimate reality of what we're trying to do with the central nervous system, as the central nervous system is supposed to be flushing out all this types of stress that comes in, physical, chemical, and emotional stress, also known as thoughts, traumas, and toxins. What we want to do is increase your body's neurologic capacity to deal with these things and lower the stress load. That's exactly what the Nervous System Blueprint is for. If you're new here, the Nervous System Blueprint is an online community that I created of like-minded people who are ready to regulate their central nervous systems on a day-to-day basis and stop chasing the fads of nervous system regulation and start implementing protocols for their nervous system specifically and their nervous system type. Oftentimes what we find is that when people talk in this realm of nervous system regulation, they're saying to do more cold plunges or do saunas or do breath work. And the reality is this is generic advice that not everyone needs to be taking. There are some universal principles in there, but mainly we want to make sure that we are implementing it towards our nervous system type. And this is why I created the school community. If you are interested in joining that community, please feel free to look in the description below or go to my bio and you'll be able to find that community. You can go ahead and join. It's a low cost relative to what you're going to get out of it as far as your nervous system health. So what is the most common mistake that people make? It's simple. If someone is in a hypoactive state and they work on low to slow breathing, we can actually continue to kick them deeper into a hypoactive state. And on the contrary, if someone is hyperactive in their central nervous system or overactive, if we're doing high intense exercise like CrossFit or high intensity interval training, this could actually further increase the amount of activity inside the central nervous system and keep that person from actually reaching their baseline state. This is why it's so important to implement a protocol that's very specific to you and not to a general nervous system population. And when I say to you, I want to make something very clear. When I say you, I mean identifying what type of nervous system you have. Is it hyperactive or is it hypoactive? And how can we identify this? One of the ways that we can identify this is taking my free nervous system identifier quiz. This not only just takes into consideration the thousands of patients that I've seen and tens of thousands of nervous systems that I've analyzed on a day-to-day basis, it also looks at over 70 plus peer-reviewed research studies to match against it. That way, when someone takes this test, they're able to identify what type of nervous system they're in, dominant in, hyperactive or hypoactive, and then most importantly, which one you want to focus on first based on the dominant state. And this test is just the foundation. You know, the nervous system blueprint itself is actually there for people to be able to follow relative to the results that they find on the nervous system identifier quiz. But just know that regardless of however you practice this, we have to take the quiz within 2 to 4 weeks of implementing these small strategies that I'll talk about either on this channel or in my online community, because we want to actually start to see those numbers go down. And as those numbers go down, we'll start to see that your nervous system becomes more regulated. So when the kids are screaming when you get home from work, you'll be able to deal with that without snapping at them so much. When an unexpected meeting pops up on your work calendar, your mind can go from, am I about to get fired, to, oh, it's just a meeting. Your brain can finally start kicking itself from survival to thrive, but it takes time and it takes very smart nervous system strategies specific to your nervous system type. So go ahead, take the quiz, find out what nervous system we're in. Are we hyperactive or hypoactive? And then let's take it from there. Make sure that you screenshot your results. Take the test in 2 to 4 weeks after implementing the strategies in this video or on this channel or on my school community so that we can get your nervous system health back to a state where it can thrive.